Hello, Dr. Watson. I'm Chris Fagala. The following video presentation is for class PS 690, and my final is called Islamic State's Women Warriors from Beginning to Hopeful End. The women of the Islamic State and some of its affiliates are widely thought to be known for only being stay-at-home moms than for doing harm. The West stereotype of women only being slaves in the Middle Eastern part of the world should be no more. The women of ISIS can very well be wolves in sheep's clothing and be just as dangerous as their male counterpart. If these women of ISIS continue to be left unchecked, we can have an even bigger problem on our hands. The recent terrorist event in San Bernardino, California has had an extremely large amount of media attention since day one. The possible reason for the attention is not because of why two Islamic extremists took the lives of 14 innocent human beings, but due to the West typically viewing terrorism as a man's domain. One of the two terrorists was female. This paper looks at the growing trend of female terrorists, why they're taking up arms, and how they can be stopped. To get to where we are now, one must look back to June 27, 2014, when the self-proclaimed Caliphate, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, announced not only to Muslim men, but all Muslims everywhere in a speech requesting all Muslims worldwide to wage jihad against the West, but it was only the men that would take up arms. Women would be the comforters and give their man what he needs, food, intercourse, and take care of the children and house. But since then, each month al-Baghdadi's war machine chews through 1,000 fighters, 50 to 60 of them suicide bombers used for basic combat maneuvers. As the United States and coalition forces bomb insurgent after insurgent, women are now taking to the battlefield alongside the men to increase their strength in numbers. Women have been involved in battle before. According to author Letty Gavin, Great Britain was perhaps the first nation to feel the need for women to fill the roles of men, as they sent thousands of men to France in August 1914 to battle the German Nazis. Each man who marched away left behind a job in the factory, a schoolroom, a bank, in the postal service, or on the farm. Those jobs were filled by women. When it became clear that many of those men would never come home, the old notion of women's place had to be reconsidered. The scarcity of men makes the employment of women a necessity. U.S. author Harry Franklin Porter wrote in a national magazine, "The women of Great Britain simply had to take over every job they could possibly manage back then, as women of the Islamic State just as the women of the Islamic State are doing now." The Islamic State are not using women as just brides and housemaids anymore, but they are also using them as fighters. The West normally doesn't think of women capable of being a terrorist. When we hear of a terrorist act on the news, we believe that atrocity could only have been caused by a male, but times have unfortunately changed. According to the University of Chicago's Project on Security and Terrorism, recently opened its database chronicling attacks from 1982 to 2015. 2015 saw the highest year ever for terrorist female activity. Females committed a total of 32 attacks, which is slightly over double the amount of attacks from 2014, and 5 times the number of attacks since 2013. Why are women taking up arms? According to UN gender expert Dr. Nimi Gowranathan, women are likely to play every role that a man will play. As to why a female is just as likely to go in a battle as a male is best described when Dr. Gowranathan wrote, "Living in deeply conservative social spaces, they faced constant threats to their ethnic, religious, or political identities, and it was typically those threats, rather than any grievances rooted in gender, that persuaded them to take up arms." There are estimated to be 600 Western female ISIS recruits, but the number of non-Western women is believed to be much higher. Around 700 women from Tunisia alone have reportedly traveled to Syria to join the jihadist groups. But just how are women being drawn into the Islamic State and other affiliated groups? According to Catherine Brown from the Defense Studies Department at King's College London, women join radical groups and travel to Islamic states both for personal and political ideas. She says, "I really resist the idea of saying it's all about emotions. It's all about finding a husband. It's all impulsive or irrational." Some do head to It's all about finding a husband. It's all impulsive or irrational. Some do head out to become so-called jihadi brides. The mindset of living what can be called a Bonnie and Clyde lifestyle seems to be a romantic kind of way women jihadists might think in order to praise Allah. Erin Marie Saltman, a counter-extremism researcher for the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, said, observers seeking to understand the phenomenon, women in battle should forget gender stereotypes. Many female recruits are drawn to Islamic State web propaganda, which depicts women as lionesses with men to build an extremist utopia. Some teenagers still struggling to understand who they are may embrace a hyper-conservative and violent ideals as they reject their own materialistic cultures. Others express anger over the perceived persecution of Muslims and a desire to find a sisterhood with similar beliefs. The women of ISIS are just as likely as the men in the desire to wage war against the West and all non-believers. There are a set of rules for women who want to wage jihad, including detailed guidelines for when she has permission to become a suicide bomber. The advice, published by ISIS propaganda farm the Zura Foundation, reads, it is upon the woman to do what she can for the jihad, to support the religion of God according to her abilities, whether it is by nursing, sewing, or serving through cooking, washing, and other things. There are also instructions for women that want to do more than just take care of the home. If a woman is raided in her house, she may defend herself with weapons, and if she has a suicide belt with her, she can detonate it without the permission of others. One eye-opening sentence of this manifesto also reads that if a woman comes under attack from unbelievers, she may attack a hospital or public place also without the permission of others. This could very well be the motive behind the December 2nd, 2015 attack at the Loma Linda University Medical Center in San Bernardino, California. The Islamic State has been causing death and destruction since its creation a few years ago. People around the world are getting sick and tired of hearing suicide bombings and shooting attacks that has taken numerous innocent lives on what seems like a daily basis. Wherever and whomever speaks death to the infidels must be stopped. It is no longer just a man's fight, but a woman's fight as well. We need to know what is currently being done to combat the Islamic State's murderous ideology. Money, oil, weapons, and propaganda are the main components that are fueling the Islamic State's campaign in recruiting men, women, and young adults from all over the world to build on their Islamic utopia. The primary aspect of this segment will state how the Islamic State is conducting their business, followed by what the United States is doing to prevent the Islamic State from pursuing that particular objective. No person, group, or country can wage a war without money. So where does the Islamic State get all of their money? The Islamic State is believed by U.S. officials to have assets including $500 million to $1 billion in cash it seized from Iraqi banks branches last year. Untold hundreds of millions of cash that U.S. officials say are extorted and taxed out of populations under the group's control, and tens of millions of dollars more are earned from looted antiquities and ransoms paid to free kidnapped victims. Another way the Islamic State is obtaining their money is by selling oil on the black market. An air campaign aimed at crippling the Islamic State's lucrative oil smuggling business has reduced the terror group's revenue from a peak of about $1.3 million a day to less than $1 million, a top State Department official said. The less oil the Islamic State has on hand, the less likely they will be able to use for transportation to get from city to city during their campaign. The U.S.-led air campaign has targeted oil infrastructure from start of its airstrikes more than a year ago. The strikes were initially aimed at oil refineries and other infrastructure in the hopes of crippling production. The Pentagon estimates the campaign has reduced production to 34,000 barrels a day from a peak of 45,000. In order to prevent the Islamic State from transporting its oil, a recent attack on an estimated 295 trucks were targeted on a single mission, destroying 116 of them. A-10s dropped 24 500-pound bombs and conducted strafing runs with 30mm Gatling guns. The AC-130s attacked with 30mm Gatling guns and 105mm cannons. The pilots saw several drivers running to a nearby tent but did not attack them. To prevent the risk of killing and injuring civilians, 2 F-15 warplanes dropped leaflets an hour before the attack, warning drivers to abandon their vehicles, and strafing runs were also conducted to reinforce the message. The weapons the Islamic State have are all too familiar because many of which once belonged to the United States military. When the U.S. military left Iraq in 2011, they thought they would be leaving their equipment in good trained hands. They left weapons, ammunition, vehicles, aircraft, and buildings to the Iraqi government in order to save the expense of bringing it home. When the mostly undisciplined Iraqi forces or Syrian rebels have been defeated or simply run away from the Islamic State in recent battles for control over territory in Iraq or Syria, the group has seized their weapons too, strengthening their arsenal further and leaving the West little option but to fight an enemy using its own weapons against it. For example, a first-time field study report by an international weapons tracking think tank, Conflict Armament Research, or CAR, has discovered 6 U.S.-made and U.S.-issued M16A4 assault rifles, each stamped "property of U.S. government," among weapons captured by Kurdish militia battling ISIS. The final way the United States and its allies are combating the Islamic State is by preventing the propaganda from spreading around the globe. The U.S. and its allies say they are winning the fight against the Islamic State by taking back territory over the past year and liberating towns in Syria and Iraq, yet ground is being lost in the area where missiles and bombs can't hit: the Internet. Executives from Google Incorporated and Facebook Incorporated, along with government officials, are now rallying support for a concerted response. Social media companies have been cooperating with Western intelligence agencies that have been walking a fine line between helping in the fight against extremism and unleashing a torrent of demands from countries worldwide to delete postings. Facebook Inc.'s chief operating officer Sheryl Sandberg said at the World Economic Forum in Davos, "When one Islamic state is removed, it's just replaced by another." In ending, one goal the United States and its allies have in common is that they believe the Islamic State as a whole is dangerous and they need to be stopped. President Barack Obama has said, "Our objective is clear, and that is to degrade and destroy ISIL, so it is no longer a threat, not just to Iraq, but also to the region and to the United States." Trying to stop a hateful ideology that has spread around the globe is easier said than done. It takes time, money, sweat, and blood. The only possible way for there to be an end to the rise of female jihadists is by acknowledging them through speech and love, not by carpet bombing them or taking out their whole family. According to Jane Huckerby, just as women are perpetrators and victims of terrorism, they are also part of its solution. Risk of backlash must also factor in the rethink on terror strategies about women, not least to avoid the public harassment of Muslim women wearing hijab in the West that follows ISIS-related attacks. In other words, as long as people such as Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump are out to put the blame on the whole instead of the few, we will get nowhere in ending the rise of the female jihadists and ultimately the Islamic State.